Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and now it's time for our Mayoral Talk with Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council. G'day, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Tony. Thank you for giving me your time again. I always like to talk to you and make sure your listeners are up to date with what's happening at Council.
Yes, well, we've got some topics to go through today, and the first one will be to do with the proposed works around Pioneer Park. Now, you've got some funding for that, I believe.
Yeah, very exciting news. Obviously, lots of damage has occurred across the entire LGA in relation to the flood events of last year. And one of the slight nuances with some of the disaster recovery funding that we get from the state government is that if it's essential infrastructure, then we can claim the full cost of repairs. If it's recreational infrastructure or non-essential infrastructure, you get one bucket of money that you've got to spread around that whole area as much as you can, use it in the best possible way. So we get $1 million to repair all the recreational infrastructure across the whole LGA. Now, there's been significantly more damage than $1 million done, but we were fortunate enough, we put an application in one particular funding program and got an extra $590,000 specifically for the repair works that have been, or for the damage that's been done around Pioneer Park. And I remember going over there at Pioneer Park after the floods had receded, and just the damage that's been done there as the water was running obviously very fast, high volumes of water, and significant damage has been done to the roadway on one side there. So the money will be used for some of that repair work. But what we want to do, and this is something that I'd really like to hear from your listeners, Tony, about this idea, is we don't want to restore it back to the same way it was, because our belief is that if we just go and do that, there'll be another flood event sometime in the future. It might be a year, might be 5 years, but there'll be another flood event of a similar nature. And if we just put it back to the way it was, then we'll end up having the same conversation. The mayor of the day will be sitting there saying, well, we're going to have to go and do the same repair works they did several years ago. So we're going to change that. And one of the problems with changing that is that at the moment, as people would be aware, it's a U-loop that you can drive around the whole Pioneer Park area. We're going to change that so that you'll drive in and out the same way, and the other side, where it's been severely damaged, not have that as a roadway. Some people are quite supportive of that idea, think that'll work well. I've had a few other people who tell me that it would not be their number one preference in terms of the way we might set it up that way. So it'd be interesting to hear from your listeners about that.
Yes, are there any works that you're flagging to do on the erosion on the river side there at all?
So on that side, so there's the two sides to Pioneer Park. The side that's on the river, that'll be changed to be parking on that side, and then the road will be changed, so that'll be basically an in-out road all on that side. And on the other side of the river, or the other side of Pioneer Park, which is further away from the river, that's where the severe damage has occurred. And when I was down there again just this week and again a few weeks ago, you're standing in tree roots that have been eroded half a metre or more away. So the severe damage done there. So the idea there is to put some native species, to put some other grasses through there to try and hold all that together. Because when you put bitumen on top of that, water gets underneath it, and as you can see from there now, it just washes away large chunks of the road. If we restore that road, we believe the same thing will happen again.
Okay. So out of the workshops that you've had, just last night, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
What came out of that?
The main thing, actually, which might be of interest to some people, is that we're actually putting forward the process, and it hasn't been finally resolved by council yet. Committee meetings make recommendations to council, but it gives you an indication of where things are headed, to actually remove the council chambers in Dubbo. Not talking about doing anything in Wellington at this stage, but in Dubbo, remove the council chambers, because at the moment those council chambers are used twice a month for our committee meetings and our council meetings. And it's a fairly large space that could have staff in there, could have office space in there, not being utilised at all. So the plan that was put forward at the committee meetings, which councillors endorsed, was to move those to our committee meeting rooms downstairs and basically reconfigure. So they're used for conferences, they're used for meetings all day, every day, and then twice a month they'd be converted by moving some tables around into a council meeting area, have the council meeting and then convert them back. A couple of advantages there. It frees up the current council meeting space so staff can be there. So it basically gives us more space, more utilisation of space. It also makes it more accessible. At the moment, if someone turned up to a council meeting that was in a wheelchair, we'd have to take them into the council building, up the lift, then along another part, then down a stair lift, and then finally into the council chamber. That might be enough to put some people in a wheelchair off coming along to a council meeting. Moving it down to the ground floor will make it easier for those people to access a council meeting. Keep in mind that I'm sure there'll be some people who won't be overly impressed with this because there's a lot of history there in the council chambers. You've got that council building that's been used for over 40 years and the council chambers have been there for those 40 years. So some significant decisions have occurred in that particular room. So some people might not be happy with the slight alteration there and really the removal of that history that's there. But just from an economics point of view, we believe it's the right way to go.
Okay. Matthew, the other area that I wanted to talk to you about was those other roads that have been a problem. So we've got the Saxa Road. At the moment, if you wanted to see someone in Dunedoo and you live in Wellington or vice versa, it's a fairly long round trip to actually get there. So just wondering, when do you think the Saxa Road might be open to, travel between the two towns?
The main part there, obviously the road itself is in a severely depleted state and local traffic is going on there at the moment. But really the main issue is at Comabella. You've got that causeway there, and as you know, you've seen the causeway. I've been on that causeway, and you've got large blocks of that concrete that have moved. You've actually got a little brush, a little tree that's actually growing up in the roadway there. And then there's a temporary crossing that goes through the river that we've been given permission from fisheries to have there. We didn't actually construct it. Some of the farmers there constructed it, but fisheries have said that's okay. So we're planning at the moment a small bridge to replace that causeway. We believe that will be a better long-term solution with the causeway there. Every time you get some rainfall, any decent falls of rain, you put water through there, and again, it doesn't take long before it builds up too high for vehicles to go through. So a bridge is the best solution there. I think before we get all normal traffic going back through there, Tony, it could be by the end of the year. It's a long-term project. We're hoping to obviously go as quick as we can with that, but again, we want to make that solution a proper solution. In the meantime, we've got more money. We've got $1.74 million from the state government to spend on the road. We allocated out of the $5 million that we were allocated from the state government. Council voted at our last council meeting to put $1.3 million towards Saxa Road. So we've got over $3 million that's being spent there on the roadway. That will then be in addition to the money we'll spend on that bridge there. So it's not as quick as we'd like, Tony. You've still got local traffic for things that are essential there, but in that through traffic there, I think you're probably talking 12 months or by the end of the year before you're getting that through traffic.
Okay. Now, it's been a while since the washaway at the Duke of Wellington Bridge, so the residents there are beginning to wonder what or if what happened there. So is there any updates on any developments there about the assessments and moving forward what might be the outcome?
No updates on the assessments yet. At our last council meeting, so not our committee meetings last night, but our last council meeting, we had some options to consider what we might do there. And there were options such as walk away and do nothing, or demolish it, or restore it to its former glory, or maybe make it a walkway or a fishing platform. Anyway, several options were discussed at that particular council meeting. And where council decided to go from that was, step one, we need to do a structural assessment. And so we'll get engineers to look at that bridge and see whether it's structurally sound. If it's not structurally sound, that probably makes the decision a bit easier in that we would have to remove that bridge or do some severe repairs to that, some major repairs. If it is structurally sound, which I'm assuming it will be, but again, I'm not an engineer and I'm not assessing it, but if it is structurally sound, then it will be a process of looking at, do we try and fill in that riverbank and actually have a roadway to access that, or do we do some other treatment there? And that will come down to cost. So what we've asked for from a council perspective is to look at several of those options that were on the table, but more importantly, get some costings associated with those. And if I wanted to be a bit silly about it, Tony, I could say, if, for example, the cost to restore it to its full glory was $50,000, then I'm sure councillors would do it in a heartbeat. If it was $20 million, then I think it'd be something that councillors would certainly not justify going forward. I'm taking two extremes there. It's going to be more than 50,000. It's going to be less than 20 million, but we won't know the information until we get those costs back. Once we get those back, that's when council will need to make a decision about what we actually do with it. And again, we'll keep the public informed on that process once we get that information back.
Yeah, I guess the big question is, when are these things going to happen? When is the engineering report going to be started? When do you expect that to come out? And some sort of resolution on this matter?
Yeah, so the first part, the engineer's report, that shouldn't take too long. We've engaged an engineer or engineering firm already to look at that, and we're looking at a couple of other bridges in the LGA as well, all in that same report, because we need to make sure some of our pedestrian bridges, for example, they were underwater for an extended period of time. So I'm talking about two of those in Dubbo. There's the Tamworth Street Bridge and the Shibble Bridge. So they'll be assessing the Duke of Wellington and those other pedestrian bridges. So that's already happening as we speak. And we've also had discussions with another government department about doing the assessment in terms of the cost of restoring different access levels for that bridge. So that's happening. They're happening concurrently, so we're not waiting for one to happen before we start the other. So we're doing those concurrently, and really we're in the hands of those particular organisations, the engineering firm and a government department. I don't have an exact time frame, but I imagine it will be several months before we get to the stage of bringing those back to council.
Okay, and will they be looking at the erosion of the riverbanks as well, or is that a separate process?
First of all, we'll be focusing on just the Duke of Wellington. There is the report that you are aware of. We've discussed it before, the 2018 report, which we wouldn't be having this conversation if action had been taken from that report by the previous council. But we've still got that report, and there's still other areas along the river that need to be looked at. So we'll look at those as a separate body of work. The urgent one in the short term is really to look at that Duke of Wellington erosion and look at that first.
Yeah, because the situation there is putting a lot of pressure on the Monteviers Road there where it meets the Mitchell Highway.
And the other thing, keep in mind, Tony, that there's damage occurring across the entire LGA. We're also demolishing a viewing platform in Dubbo at the bottom of Sir Road and Cutler Park. There's a viewing platform there, and it's an area where I often ride my bike, and I'll often see people out there taking photos. I've seen wedding photos being taken there. It's a popular area, but we've made the decision to demolish that viewing platform, not so much for the damage that's been done to the platform, but the damage that's been done to the riverbank underneath where the support structure is. And obviously, it doesn't matter how good the viewing platform is, if there's no support underneath it, then that can be dangerous. So for safety of people that would go out on that, we're going to be removing that with no immediate plans to restore it at this stage. But that will be something we'll look at down the track, and whether that's the best place for a viewing platform. And we might need to construct some of these differently, Tony, because at the moment that's been constructed relying on the strength of the riverbank to hold up that viewing platform. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to continue to rely on the riverbank to hold up any structures we put there.
Okay. Now, moving forward, we've got the draft budget plan workshops happening. So where are we up to now with that exactly?
It's actually a good indication of just how long this process takes. The budget will be maybe in the vicinity of $200 million for next financial year, so it's a significant amount of money. And you hope that there's a fair bit of work that goes into planning a budget of that size. Well, the work started already, so our first workshop has been held, and the final decision for that budget won't occur until the end of June, ready for the next financial year. So it really is about a 4-month process of planning. The first workshop is really just to look at the big picture. So we've had that workshop, we've looked at the big picture for some various areas, some various functions of council, and just to get a bit of a snapshot of that, we've got more workshops to go, and essentially we'll go through that process. We'll hold some workshops, we'll start to talk to the public about some of the priorities, about where they might like to see money spent. We'll eventually end up with a draft budget that will go out for public submissions. The community's invited. In fact, I strongly encourage the community to put submissions in about the draft budget that goes out. Then it'll come back to a final council meeting where all of those submissions will be considered and then decisions made about that budget before next financial year. So if there are particular projects that people have in mind at the moment, there are particular capital funding projects where you might need some capital expenditure, now would be a time to start talking to councillors, send them some emails, give them some of the ideas. And one of the things, especially when it gets to the draft budget, Tony, one of the things that I really like is when people give you the alternative. In other words, it's easy to say, don't do that or just do this. But what I really appreciate is when the community takes the time to say, well, you're spending some money on this area, but I think you're better off spending it on this area over here. In other words, it's only one bucket. If we spend extra money on some area, we've got to take it from somewhere else. And that's the thing that people don't always appreciate. They might say, can you spend some money fixing the road in front of my house? And you say, sure, which one of your friends would you like to say we're not going to fix the road in front of their house? Because again, it is a nil-sum game. We try and have a budget that's a $0 budget, so that if you put it into somewhere extra, you've got to take it from somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. And is there anything else you'd might like to add, Matthew?
Again, I just encourage the community to start having those conversations. If there's things that you want, send emails to councillors, ring them up, talk to them when you run them down the street, whatever it might be, but communicate those needs to councillors.
Okay. And we've been talking to Matthew Dickinson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council on Binjang 91.5.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.